Chapter 3. Every time I say James, I got to look at Robert. It's almost there. But anyway, we're going to look at half this chapter today, so got some ways to go. But anyway, James is a very practical book of the New Testament, and you'll see James could heat up the room this day. We could turn off the gas, not that cold. Remember one Sunday we came to church and the gas meter was broken. I think it was like 40 degrees in here. There was no heat at all, but we still had church service. But if James was here that Sunday, he could have heated up the room, with his fiery sermon. So when you read this one, chapter 3, it kind of hits home and where we live in our everyday life and the struggles that we face in life as well. Really, as the book of James, he addresses the subject of faith. Faith is his main theme of this whole book. And really, the practical way in which that faith is to be lived out in everyday life. So, faith to James is not mere words. He says, show me your faith. And so that faith, he says, should be practiced in a person's life. He takes the faith that one is to have in a practical level and says, wait, if you have faith in God, then there must be something different about your life. There has to be something different about your life. He says, show me that faith, okay? I don't want to just hear about your faith, but I want to see your faith in action in your everyday life. And last week, we looked at the outward manifestation of faith. What is the outward manifestation of faith? He tells us the outward manifestation of our faith is good works. Good works. And one of the things he uses to illustrate that fact was that a person, he says a brother or sister, so it's actually someone within the congregation, has a need and we observe that need. We have the ability to meet that need, and yet we say to that person, God bless you. God bless you, I'm going to pray for you while your pocket is full of some money that can actually help him. He needs food. He lacks the necessities of life. He has food and he needs clothing, which probably means, hey, he's going out into the winter and he doesn't have a winter coat. And you have the means to meet that need, and yet you don't meet that need. He says, what kind of faith is a faith that doesn't help other people? You see visibly someone has a need, and yet you turn your blind eye to that need, and I'll pray for you, God bless you, whatever. It's not going to work. To James, that's not the kind of faith that we should have. A true faith is a faith that manifests itself in a changed life and the works which we perform. A life of a believer should be producing works. That's what James says. If you are a believer, your life should be producing something. It should be producing works. Now, we looked at the fact that works do not justify a person. It is not by works that we gain favor or entrance into heaven. We're not justified by our works. The scripture is very clear that a person is justified by faith and faith alone. He says, therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. If it was based upon our performance and what we could do, well, what is the measure of it? Have we done enough? How do we know when we get to heaven? Is the God going to have a scale there to weigh our good works and bad works? And if we have more bad than good, he's going to say, all right, you're in, you're not in, you're in, you're at, whatever. No, it doesn't work like that. He says that we are justified by faith and faith alone. And yet James goes a step farther and says, now that we have faith, that faith should be seen in our life by the things that we do. Paul writes, for by grace are ye saved through faith, that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. I mean, he adds that little phrase in there, not of works, lest any man should boast. I mean, we love to boast. James is talking about boasting as well. Hey, look at me, look what I've done. He says, no, it doesn't work. Look what God has done for you. Look at the cross, and that's all you have to look at. It's not based upon our performance. Now these good works are seen in our everyday life. He says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. Paul writes these words. Let's see if you measure up with this. I memorized, I'm going to quote some verses for you today. So usually the verses that I quote, I'll give you a secret. It's all the areas I struggle with. So anyway, I try to fortify those areas, and sometimes it takes a while to connect the verse with what I'm doing wrong, right? But here's a verse. He says, do all things. What is doing all things? Everything, right? You go to work, it's doing all things, right? He says, do all things without murmuring and disputings. Murmuring is complaining. Disputings is arguing. So he says, do all things without murmuring and disputings, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. So he says, hey, when you're going, in the biggest problem that God had with the children of Israel when they left Egypt, as you read the story of their wilderness wanderings, what was it? What? Complaining, murmuring and complaining. When I hear the word murmuring, I always think of a word that needs a muffler, right? If there's a muffler, complaining needs a muffler, right? Murmuring sounds like something that's coming out of your exhaust pipe without a muffler, right? It needs to be it needs a muffler to be silenced. You need to see the Midas man, okay? Because when we begin to murmur, we begin to complain about life, really. And when we begin to complain about life, we're saying, wait, God has made a mistake here. What do we complain about? I mean, it's endless, the things that we complain about and dispute about, and yet he says that's not the way life is to be lived. In this new life that we have, we are to shine as lights in the world. He picks up the same thing Jesus said, let your light so shine before men. Now James addresses, so that's the outward change that is visible. Now he addresses an inward change as well. That change or lack of change is seen in our everyday life and through our human body. And so he talks about this area that nobody has mastered, because if you've mastered it, then you can leave now. You don't need this sermon. And really the way he presents it is a present tense verb, which means nobody has mastered this one. And you know what the mastery is? He's talking about the tongue. He says the tongue can no man tame. No man can tame that tongue. So now he goes from the outward expressions to our faith to the inward expression of our faith. And so now we look at the tongue as the enemy, but that's not where the enemy lies. The enemy lies within the human heart. Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so Jesus identifies the true source and problem that people have. And what is the true source and problem? The true source and problem resides within an individual. This is what Jesus said. Remember, they confronted him and says, hey, your disciples are eating and they didn't wash their hands. Okay, it's always good to wash your hands, right? So he says, so they're defiled. And here's what Jesus says. That which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within, out of the heart of man, so he identifies our problem, our main problem, as coming from within. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed what? Evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, and evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within, and they defile the man. So now they start. Where do they start? They start from within. And then they show their expressions from without, okay? I mean, he mentioned some things. Adultery is a physical act. Fornication is a physical act. Some of these things are physical acts, but where do they start? He says they start in the heart of man. They start in our thought processes, and then they take action in life. And that's what James is saying. Hey, the problem, you say, is with that little part of that little thing that's in your mouth, it's your tongue. No, that's not the problem. The problem is not your tongue. It's the heart. Once you change the heart, then you change what comes out of the mouth, okay? The heart. If you hate somebody, are you going to speak kind, friendly words to them? What kind of words are you going to exchange with your enemy? Sweet words or bitter words, right? What are you going to say about that enemy, right? Are you going to say, hey, he's not such a bad person, he's having a bad day? No, he's an idiot, right? I mean, we go down that road, he's an idiot, he's a jerk, and all of a sudden our mouth begins to spew, right? And then all of a sudden someone pushes the right button, right? We're all right, we're contained until someone pushes the right button, and then the floodgate opens up, right? Let me tell you about our governor and the mayor of Chicago. We can't mention their names because they'll cut us off of YouTube. So we just say mayor and governor, right? Wonderful people, right? We spew about people, right? We spew about all kinds of people. And yet, where does it come from? He says it comes from within, out of the heart of man. And so he says of the tongue is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. That's how he describes the tongue. The tongue is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And really, in this first section that we're looking at, verses 1 through 12, he addresses a number of things. First of all, its control, its destructive nature, its uncontrolled nature, and its inconsistency. Okay? And now we have, you got the book of wisdom. The book of wisdom is the book of Proverbs, and within Proverbs you have all kinds of verses that are, okay, here's what I do. When I find a verse that I need, here it is, a 3x5 card cut in half. Thing you can actually carry in your pocket and pull it out wherever you're at and memorize it and then review it. But here's some of the verses I've memorized. He says, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the tables of thine heart." Now here is a sampling of what Solomon says about the tongue. Okay, when you go to Costco, you go from station to station to get a sampling, right? So if you could skip lunch and all those stations they have at Costco's, you could actually walk out with a full stomach. You could skip your lunch that day, right? From one place to another, you could begin to enjoy the things they're putting out there. And so I'm just going to give you a sampling of what James says about the tongue. He says, "An hypocrite with his mouth destroyeth his neighbor, but through knowledge shall the just be delivered. A talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. There is that speaketh," now he's talking about the tongue, "there is that speaketh like the piercing of the sword." So the words that you come out of your mouth can actually be like a piercing of the sword. "There is that speaketh like the piercing of the sword, but the tongue of the wise is health." Now you got out of the same mouth coming the piercing of the sword, or you can speak health. "A man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressor shall eat violence. He that keepeth his mouth," this is a good one, because a lot of times we backtrack and say, "Ooh, I should have never said that," right? Proverbs says, "He that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction." Now we're in an argument, me and Paul, right? I always like to pick on Paul because he sits right close to me, so he's the first object of my illustration. "A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So I could turn away, one of us can turn away another person's wrath by speaking a soft answer. He said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. So now look at the comparison. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. What is James telling us in this passage of Scripture? You know what he's telling us? Simple. Control yourself. I mean, we've heard it said, you probably said it to your kids, control yourself. They're out of control. You tell them, control yourself, right? And so really, what is James telling us in this passage of Scripture? Basically, the whole message of the tongue is control. Control yourself, okay? Control your spirit, control your passions, control yourself. And so James sets forth the instruction to control what we say, but it goes farther than what comes out of our mouth. He relates in this chapter the wrong and right use of the tongue. He says the tongue is a fire. The tongue is a fire. He says the tongue can no man tame. And so he says again, it is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. The mastery of the tongue. Again, he calls upon us to master that little member in our body. And so really, he sums it up with just a few words. What are the few words that he sums up this teaching on the tongue? Apparently, he was versed in Scripture, because you can find a lot of these principles in the book of Proverbs, okay? Proverbs is the practical outworking of our life. It's practical wisdom for everyday life. Solomon writes on our interaction with one another. How do we relate to one another? How do we act towards others? How do we handle other people in our life? Whereas the book of Psalms deals more with our relationship with God. It's got some elements in there, both of them do, but overall it's our worship of God. It's how we relate to God. It's in the book of Proverbs, it's how we relate to other individuals. So really, he sums up the principles in a few words that really he identifies in this book. The first is its control, okay? James tells us that a living faith must produce inward results. The development of self-control. You know what the hardest thing that you will ever face in life? It's not the enemy. It's the enemy within, okay? It's conquering yourself. It's bringing your passions and desires into check. It's saying no to yourself, right? I mean, you got the dog. I remember my friend gave this illustration and talking about James chapter 1, where he talks about temptation yields to so on, temptation comes. And really, where do we put temptation to its rest? In the beginning stage, right? And he says when he took his dog out and he saw those ears go up, when he says no to the dog, guess what? The dog backed off, right? But if he didn't get those words in right away, guess what? The dog was gone. And we do the same thing. I mean, those ears go up and temptation comes and we're on our way. And when that process starts, what are we to do? No, we're to say no. In another sense, we're to say down boy, right? And where's the down boy at? It's within. It's conquering our own selves. It is producing the kind of change in character that is associated with a life in God. So the first thing is control. Self-control is tested really by the use of one's tongue. Self-control is seen through the tongue, right? I mean, when you get angry and you have an argument, nobody has an argument, right? You ever have an argument with your wife? Does your wife ever have an argument with you? What goes on in those arguments, right? I was in Woodman's one day. It was Thursday. Had every senior under the sun in the store. And these people were all in their 70s. I walked 5 feet in front of a lady's cart, and the only thing I heard was, it's like, really? You're a senior. Where are you going? I'm thinking, you know what? It's another episode. It's the Bonanza thing. You're missing an episode of Bonanza. So I told the guy that was sitting in front of me, or standing in front of me, a senior as well, I said, you know, these older people are, I went to Sam's one time, and Sam's closes for lunch from 1:30 to 2. And seniors were having a fit because they weren't open at 2, and they didn't open the thing until 2:02 or 2:02 or 2:03, and they're having a fit. Where are these people going, right? They're in a hurry to go where? Don't get in front of one of these people when they're driving one of those carts around or when they're pushing one. I tell you, they have a fit. And I asked the guy in front of me, I said, what is the problem here? What are they in a hurry? Well, where's the hurry coming in? Are they in a hurry to get back home to fight with their husband or fight with their wife? Aren't they glad that they got out for a couple hours and there's some relief here? What are they in a hurry for? And yet, that's who people are, right? And whoever, you know, whatever you are now, you're going to be worse when you get older, right? If you are impatient, if you are at the level of 50% impatient, by the time you retire and get old, you're going to be on the negative 50, okay? You're not going to have patience with anything. What you are now is not going to improve with age. It only gets worse, right? So now is the time to make some changes in our life, right? It is to bring our life into conformity with what God says. And self-control is tested by what comes out of our mouth. I mean, when you're angry, what comes out of your mouth? A couple curse words here or there, a couple this or that, things you shouldn't even be saying. And where is the tongue the problem? Well, it's the means by which communication is made, but that's not where the problem is. The problem is within, right? And anger talks about the fact that something is being heated up. Where are you heating up? Is your tongue getting hot? No, your heart gets hot, and pretty soon you have a fiery tongue, right? And so really, what is the mastery of the tongue? It's in here. It's not here. It's here. When you change this, you change what comes out of your mouth. If you're bitter, if you're hateful, what comes out of your mouth? Kind words? No, they're not going to be kind words. A man's words are the revelation of his inner character. So a man's words are the revelation of his inner character. Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, man speaks. And he says now that we get into this passage of Scripture, he says in James chapter 3, he says, my brethren, be not many masters or teachers, knowing that ye shall receive the greater condemnation. So there's accountability for even these people that are communicating God's word, because there's inconsistencies in their life as well. He says, for in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle his own body. Behold, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of the fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, a rudder, whithersoever the governor listeth. So here we have the fact that he says, first of all, in verse 2, for in many things we offend all. It sounds like the guy that's speaking in verse 1, but it's not what he's talking about. He says, in many things we offend all. What he's really saying, in many things we stumble. In many things we stumble. Okay? The fact that we are not perfect people. And he says, in that imperfection is seen in our life, in that in many areas we stumble. It's the idea of a person that hits their foot. The individual either trips or he stumbles, right? We've all done that. Middle of the night, something there, and all of a sudden, we catch ourselves maybe before we hit the floor, but we stumble. That's what he's saying. In many things, there are many things in life that cause us to stumble. He says in many things we stumble, and really that is where we live. But he takes it to the next area, which he zeroes in on the tongue. So he says, in many things we offend or stumble, but if any man stumbles or offends not in word, the same is a perfect man and able also to bridle his own body. Now he takes it from the many things to just one thing, the tongue. The offend in word. That he says, if you don't offend in word, that man is a perfect man and able also to bridle his whole body. The idea of perfect means not perfect without sin, but it means a mature person. And he says, if you can bridle your tongue, you are able to bridle what? All of your emotions, all the things that your body wants to do and your mind tells you to do, you're able to bring those things into subjection. He talks about the whole body. Romans chapter 6 talks about we are to yield our members as instruments of righteousness unto God. What is he talking about? What is Paul talking about when he says we are to yield our members as instruments of righteousness unto God? I mean, what instruments that we have that we're to yield to God? Well, there's two hands, right? Two hands, you can do things that are honoring and dishonoring to God with your eyes, your ears, your mouth. All these are members. Your feet, where those feet take you, maybe where you shouldn't be. And he says we are to yield our members as instruments of righteousness unto sin. He said in our old life we yielded our members as instruments to sin. Now we are to yield our members as instruments of righteousness unto God. That's why Paul says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Be not conformed to this world. Don't be placed in the world's mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So James pictures again the hardest thing to control, which is the tongue, and then he zeroes in on if you can master that, you can master other things as well. Next we have, and he gives two examples, the horse and the ship. The horse has just a bit placed within his mouth. That little bit is able to control that whole horse. He's talking about the tongue. Then he's talking about a ship. A ship, I think you saw a ship that goes to Alaska, is like 10 or 15 stories. I mean, it's got a go-kart thing on it. It's got tubes going off the side as you're going through the ocean, as you're going through a water park kind of. I mean, it's like a little city, right? And so what is this big ship controlled with? It's controlled with a little helm or a rudder. Controls that big ship. And he's talking about the tongue as well. It's a very little member, and yet it has great control and must be brought into subjection. It's just a little member, yet causes us so much trouble. It manifests itself. How does the tongue manifest itself? In deceit and lying, boasting, pride, harsh words, unkind words, gossip, unkindness, anger, and harshness sum up the things many times that come out of a person's mouth. The second thing he talks about, its destructive nature. Is the tongue the destructive nature of the tongue in verse 5 and 6? Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on the fire of hell. Wow! James just gives it to you, He unloads it all. He doesn't hold back at all. He says, this tongue has a destructive nature to it, and the description that he uses is quite picturesque, really. In verse 5, he says it's a little member and boasts great things, okay? How many times have we been caught boasting about our successes or this or that? We boast, right? Because that's the tongue. And so now it's not just the tongue, it's the heart of pride, and out of that heart of pride comes boasting. So it boasts great things, he says. Basically, what does the tongue do? I mean, look at me. Look at what I've done. Look at what I have accomplished. He says it's a fire. It's a fire, and how does that fire start? It just starts with a very, very little flame. And once that fire starts, it can consume hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of acres of forest, along with anything else in its pathway. Remember a couple of years ago, all those forest fires in California, and the consuming of all the forest, the houses that were burnt down, and I'm sure animals that lost their lives, people that lost their life. And so the fire is a very destructive thing. It says it's a world of iniquity. It defiles the whole body. It's set on course. It's set on the course of nature. It's set on fire, the course of nature. It can set nature on fire. And then it's set on what? The fire of hell. I mean, that's your tongue. He says, where the tongue, what's the origin of the things that we do and say? It's set on the fire of hell. Well, thank you, James. We'll have you back next week to speak to us again. I don't think we want this guy as a guest speaker, right? We say goodbye to him, and we're not having him back ever again. The third thing is it's hard to control. Look at verse 7 and 8. He says, for every kind of beasts and of birds and of serpents and of things of the sea is tamed and hath been tamed of mankind, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And so we see that it's hard to control. He says there are beasts or animals, there's birds, serpents, sea creatures, can be brought under subjection. Contrast is the nature of animals to the nature of man. The animal world is open to control by human nature, but there is an inability to control what? Ourselves. The inability to control ourselves. He says that these animals are tamed to bring under control, to subdue, to curb, to bring into subjection. The tongue, he says, can no man tame. He uses a present tense verb. Is able, he says, is a standing inability to tame. You can't tame it. You know why you can't tame it? Have you tamed your tongue? No, at any moment, in a dispute, in an argument, in some situation, you're caught in where you're caught, do I tell the truth or do I tell the lie? What does the tongue do? Many times it goes down the pathway of lying, right? Or you're fired up, and some words come out of your mouth that shouldn't. Or you have an argument, and then all of a sudden what spews is like a floodgate opening up, what comes out of the mouth. Who knows? Only God knows what's going to come out of that tongue, right? And yet he says there's a standing inability to control the tongue. Because in any given situation, there's the response, right? And that response, that volcano that goes off many, many times is not a pretty picture. And so there's an inability to control the tongue. It talks about man's inability to control his own tongue. Again, at any moment, whatever pushes that button, we can see its destructive nature. We can conquer the world, but we can't conquer ourselves, right? People have conquered the world. Alexander the Great conquered the world, and yet he could not conquer himself. We can conquer the world, yet we cannot conquer ourselves. Verse 8 says, it is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Restless is unstable. It cannot be trusted to stay submissively in its proper place. It is unreliable, consistently prone to break out in vicious words. Is this just for me? Doesn't this fit everybody? I mean, if we took some shoes on up here, all the shoes would fit today, right? Because that's where we all are, and if we're honest with ourselves, right? This is where we stumble. And he says, hey, we stumble in many areas, but if you don't stumble in this area, hey, you've made some great progress. But guess what? We still have a tendency to stumble in this area as well. He says it's an unruly evil. It cannot be restrained. It says it's deadly, which means death-bearing. It's poison, again, as a serpent's tongue. He mentions poison. Its poison is deadly and works its venom through the tongue. The last thing is inconsistency. Verses 9 through 12, he talks about the tongue's inconsistency. He says, therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men who are made in the similitude or likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. He says, my brethren, these things ought not to be. Doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. And he talks now about the tongue's inconsistencies. First of all, he says, therewith, by it, he says, we is characteristic of mankind in general. And as soon as he says we, guess what? That is where we can put our name as well, right? That is where we can put, therefore, therewith, with our tongue. What do we do with our tongue? Well, one of the reasons we go to church on Sundays to do what? Praise and worship God. So that's something good and honorable we can do with our tongue. Worship and praise God, right? He says, out of this same mouth, therewith bless we God, even the Father. So with this tongue we bless, he says, but with this tongue we can curse as well. And all of a sudden we remember Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that we can be two different people at the very same time or in any moment. He says we bless the highest and noblest use of our tongue. We bless to speak well, to extol. We bless God. Wonderful, that's great. The tongue is an instrument in giving expression to the feeling of a speaker's heart. We bless God. But it also is an expression of the feeling of a heart. What do? He says, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. How can that be? He says we bless God and then we curse men that are made in the likeness of God. And so now what does he do? He paints the inconsistency of the tongue. That the tongue can do good, but it can do evil as well. The tongue can bless God, but at the very same time, curse men who are made in the image of God. So there's the personal abuse, there's the loss of temper in heated controversy. We curse people who are made in the image of God. Both blessing and cursing flow from the same mouth. James paints this as being inconsistent. He relates again the nature, he uses nature as the illustration. A fountain, he says, the springs good water. He says, but a spring can't produce good water and bad water. He says a fig tree, it's consistent. What is a fig tree going to produce? Figs. He says a fig tree cannot produce olives. Neither an olive tree produce figs. He says a water cannot produce at the same time fresh water and salt water. There has to be a consistency. So we need, first of all, when you get all done with this, and now that James has beat us up completely, I want to lift up your head a little bit. Don't want you to go out with your tail between your legs. The tongue can no man tame, but God can. See, God again is our resource and helper for all that we go through in life. We can't do it. He already tells us we can't do it. The tongue can no man tame, but God can help us with the tongue. Jesus says, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And so really, what is it that we need? We need a complete overhaul and a tune-up. We need some work. And that's what James does. I mean, James is relentless. He's merciless, okay? I told you, he's the doctor, he's the dentist, that when you go, he shows no mercy. He tells you that tooth has to be pulled. And hey, glad you're here today, and it'll cost you $350, and 2 minutes later, your tooth is out. He's the surgeon that says, no mercy. It's coming out, right? Your gallbladder's coming out, or this is coming out, or that's coming out. He shows no mercy. He just tells you what it is. It's got to be done. That's how James is. This is it. Cut and dry, black and white. You got to do it. That's how James is. He hits you and you don't even know it hit you. And when he hits you, he goes for the knockout, right? And so really, what does he identify? He identifies the outworkings of the Christian life, which should be seen by all, which is good works. Now he zeroes in on, wait a minute, there's got to be some changes here. The changes come from within. The only way you're going to change anything that ever comes out of your mouth is what? Change your heart. You got to change the heart. You got to change the way you think, the way you react, your attitudes, and all those things which are hidden from others. You can't change this until you change this. And so James says, hey, you know what? It's time to do a little surgery. And we're not going to cut out your tongue. Remember the Indian saying, man speaks with a forked tongue, right? How many times were they deceived in this? Their land was taken away and other things, right? And he saw these white people that came to America. These people talk with a forked tongue, right? Well, it's time to get rid of the forked tongue, right? And the only way you get rid of the forked tongue is you change this. When you change this, then speech changes. And he says, when you do all that, you know what? You've made some progress in the Christian life. Now you are a perfect or mature person. You're not mature until you can control your desires. You're not mature until you can control your tongue. I don't care if you're 99 years old, but as far as God is concerned, you could still be a baby if you aren't controlling yourself. Let's pray. Father, again, we thank you for your goodness and mercies to us. We thank you for your word that instructs us and teaches us and guides us in your perfect way. Again, we thank you for our time together here. In Jesus' name, amen.